All right, welcome everyone to the Southside Library and also to our online viewers. We appreciate you coming out today to hear Krishnan Venkatesh, who is going to be talking about the ancient Greek setting of Circe. Krishnan has been a tutor, which is a professor at St. John's College for 34 years. He was instrumental in running the Eastern Classics program for them. And he is also a founder and developer of the St. John's College Film Institute, which is kind of a media literacy thing. Rather than sticking with all the classics, I think they thought that it would be good to go with some of the contemporary media. He has written several books, including Do You Know Who You Are? Essays on the dialogues of the Buddha, and then also Frodo's Wound, about the significance of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So before we get started in full, I just have a few announcements to make. In case of an emergency, there's an exit in the back corner over there. There's also 2 double doors in the next room that you came through to get in here. And I wanted to let you know that we have a art installation out there where you can take your photo in front of a set of wings made of agave cactus. We have a number of programs. If you haven't already grabbed a program, please feel free to do so. There's some on the table still out here, and there's some out in the library with all the different programming for this Circe Santa Fe Reads. Some of the things I want to draw attention to: next Friday and Saturday, we're going to have a planetarium set up here that your kids and you are welcome to come hang out in, and there's going to be some programs on Saturday. And then also on Saturday, we're going to have the Art Through the Loom group here, who are going to talk about weaving, and they're going to have some alpacas here and go through the whole process of weaving. And then I want to make sure and remind you to reserve your spot for the closing of the Circe Santa Fe Reads on May 16th. We're having a big shindig down at the Convention Center. So, and there's more in this program, so be sure to grab one. All right, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Krishnan Venkatesh.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all for coming. I find myself wondering why he pointed out the emergency exits. So if I start acting strange, you know how to escape. So before I start, how many of you have read Circe? Okay. And okay, so quite a few of you haven't read it or haven't finished it yet. I warn you, there will be some spoilers, and I will try to avoid giving spoilers. How many of you have read the Odyssey? Okay, very good. Homer's Odyssey. Yeah, okay, good. How many of you have read Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound? Okay, fewer. Okay, so just so that I know how much I need to say. So the title of this, The Ancient Greek Setting of Circe, this was my fault. It's a terrible title because for various reasons, you know, and so Aaron suggested it, and I was like not conscious enough to realize that this was maybe not the best title, and because there's 3 reasons. So one is that the novel itself has, as you know, has very little to do with ancient Greece as a place, as a culture, as a history, even. So there's nothing about ordinary life of Greeks. There's nothing about Greek politics, city-states, the history. Everything, nearly all the action happens either up there or on an island. So the book itself doesn't draw a lot from Greek culture and Greek history. So not much I can say there. Fortunately, because I don't know much about that stuff anyway. And secondly, ancient Greek background. I find myself thinking a lot, what do we mean by that ancient Greek background? What we call Oh, you can't hear? Okay. Thank you. So this phrase, ancient Greek, ancient Greece, it covers kind of vast number of different cultures. Actually, you think about how big how widely spread it is. Vast number of different city-states and political regimes and histories, very varied. And at St. John's, we find ourselves quite quickly not referring to the Greeks, like the Greeks thought this, the Greeks thought that, because it's hard enough to figure out what one Greek thought than to make generalizations about the culture. So ancient Greek background, a little bit questionable. I can talk about like some aspects of the Greek background, but I don't think there is a background, right? There's many possible ones. Thirdly, in a way, the book Circe, the way in which the book Circe has an ancient Greek background is that the book is a literary fantasy. Basically, I mean, if you go and treat it as a fantasy novel, that would not be bad. It would be like if you read Ovid's Metamorphoses as a kind of compendium of Greek myths, that might be a good way to approach Circe as a compendium of myth. And that's fine. But as a literary fantasy, the way in which it's literary is that Madeline Miller sets herself in conversation with, mainly I think with two books, with Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound and with Homer's Odyssey. So the book is like an addition to this conversation, and I'll talk more about this later with more detail. But so it's part of a conversation, kind of like a modern contribution to a small corner, or even big corner, significant corner, but a corner nonetheless of Greek mythology and of Greek fable. So there's a modern entering into conversation with these two books. Now, it's a literary fantasy, right? And so literary fantasy. Okay, so what do I mean by fantasy? So fantasy novels generally have they take place in another world or another aspect of this world, and very often what you get in a fantasy novel is an alternative version of the world. So it's got to be recognizable to us, otherwise we couldn't identify with anyone, we couldn't participate in the world. But in a fantasy about a different kind of world, one of the things that hits you is the differences that these beings have from the way we are, from what we recognize as human, right? But also the similarities. So fantasy novels tend to take off in an alternative, sometimes parallel direction, but then they touch on things that are familiar. So for example, with the Lord of the Rings, you find yourself trying to orient the human within this world of elves, hobbits, and humans and other kinds of beings. And for some reason, most people find themselves identifying with the hobbits rather than the humans, right? And that's interesting, because then you start asking the question: how do hobbits say more about the human experience than these human warriors? And so you start thinking about this kind of thing. So for me, that one of the interesting things about reading fantasy novels is that they get you thinking through a very oblique way about the human, what's human here, and this particular fantasy novel obviously deals with a world of Greek gods and titans and Greek divinities, and they intersect with the human world in various ways. I mean, some of them have human children, some of them have human lovers, and one of the particularly interesting things is for Madeline Miller to get into the mindset of a god, a Greek god, a divine being, and to see how they relate to the humans. What are humans for them? Obviously, we have glimpses of this in Homer too, when you find gods like Zeus and Apollo and Athena taking the side of their human favorites in the war, but then you think, well, these are like pets to them, right? They don't really understand human suffering because they can't die. Right, and so this is Yeah. So when you read this book, from the very first few pages, you're in this world of Greek gods, and it's rarefied, and it's in Godland, so somewhere. But you can't help thinking about how these people, what's different between these people and humans, right? And again, I'll come back to that. Um, so so back to the title, also the what could be meant by the ancient Greek background to Circe, and I was thinking one thing people might be interested in is the what kind of view of the gods Madeline Miller takes in this book. Now it's important to see that there's no official theology or authorized theology of Greek gods. You can't be a Greek god fundamentalist, right? Because there are literally thousands of different versions of these stories. So I think in a polytheistic world, there's very little inclination towards fundamentalism, right? Because in a polytheistic world, there's always another way of looking at things, right? And so you don't expect a rigid theology. You don't even expect strict agreement or even consensus about what these gods are, what they did, what they said, what they like, were they good, were they bad, all those things. They all appear differently in different Greek books even, right? And if you ask the question, what did the Greeks believe? In what sense did they believe in these gods? Well, it's not the same sense of belief that you would say in a Judeo-Christian world, where you're asked to believe in certain propositions, right? Give your assent that this is true, that is true, and if you don't believe, then you're not in this group. You're out there. You're burning forever, right? And so but there's nothing like that in with Greek religion, and there's also a huge variety in the number of gods and in the versions of these gods, the different versions of these gods. Every locality has a different one. If you think about India, it was probably more like that than like the modern world, right? So every place you go to had their local gods, their local temples, and their version of the Olympian gods. So it's a free for all, theologically and anthropologically exciting. When the Greek writers write stories or incorporate Greek gods in their stories, you'll always find a different take on them. And for me, this is not dissimilar to when somebody makes a new Dracula movie or a new Spider-Man movie, right? There are certain essentials that have to be observed. For example, Dracula has to be a vampire, right? And somebody has to die, and vampires drink blood. So there's certain things that are fixed. But when you go to watch one of these movies, what you're interested in is the different take on this. What is the twist that's going to be given now? Same with Spider-Man. Kind of what's the twist? You begin, and the better you know the stories, the more interested you are in what the twist is. So there's kind of like open-mindedness to this. Was that a good twist? Was that a bad twist? Was that interesting? Did it add anything? So you think about these things, and I'm sure that the ancient Greek audience would have gone to these plays and asking, oh, okay, this is the 15th time I've seen a play about Oedipus. What more can they do with this? And so there's going to be a different twist every time. Well, Greek authors all had multiple versions of these. So Sophocles did multiple versions of the Oedipus trilogy, for example. So the same author might revisit the same story at different times of his life. So again, dealing with, they'd take this core story and then they'd reimagine it, for the significance of their period, the time they were in then. So you look for takes, and so Circe won't tell us, the novel Circe won't tell us much about ancient Greece, but because it's she puts herself in conversation with the books of ancient Greece that treat of this character Circe and that treat of the gods and the titans. What you get in this novel is a modern re-envisioning of the story, and actually a modern reweaving of multiple stories together, right? So if you don't know anything about ancient Greek literature and you're reading this novel, it's a fantasy novel. If you do know about ancient Greek literature and you're reading this novel, hey, this is really interesting. Right? It's really interesting what she's doing. It's ingenious, it's witty, it's imaginative, right? And she does some new stuff with this. So and she's also learned. I find I'm very impressed by the little corners of things that she pulls out. More of that later. So I'm going to talk about the two books that this book sets itself in conversation with, right? So the first one is Prometheus Bound. Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus, the first of the great Greek dramatists, right? Aeschylus, Aeschylus. And Prometheus Bound is short. Shelley did a version of this called Prometheus Unbound, which is also a remarkable poetic play. But Prometheus Bound, it's an astonishing play, because so Prometheus was punished by Zeus for giving gifts to humans, and this giving gifts to this pathetic, miserable, struggling species. So Prometheus gave us fire in Aeschylus's version, gave us fire, and gave us the boon of disabling our ability to foresee our own deaths. Right. So we live as if we're not going to die. In other words, right? And that was what Prometheus gave us, according to this. For this presumption, Zeus chained Prometheus to a rock for all eternity to have his liver pecked out daily by vultures, right? And so the whole of this play, the main character of this play spends the entirety of this play on stage chained to a rock. Right, so he doesn't do anything, and he's visited by various beings, and most of them are gods, right? Except for one who's, I think, Io, who's a human or half-human, who's tormented, and so this play, you should read it, because it's like, if you like modern drama, just the idea of having a character stationary, chained to a rock for the whole, it's so much Beckett. Right, so Beckett, and so in this play, even though most of the play is about a god, a titan, who's chained to a rock, you have glancing reflections really on what it is to be human, and the question of, so Zeus punishing him for his empowerment of human beings. It raises a lot of questions, and I find when I read the play the last time, I thought, was Zeus maybe right? Right, so that we couldn't handle fire, because eventually we'll do dumb things like make bombs, right? Make big bombs, can we be trusted with this? So the play ends up, I think, to be a very profound play about technology and knowledge, but it's Prometheus's fault. Right, so Prometheus gets punished by this, and the novel really takes off from there with Circe's compassion for Prometheus, which immediately sets her on a kind of threshold between gods and humans. With a god who has some kind of sympathy for humans because something about Prometheus moves her. Now when you read a lot of Greek literature, there are really two background events that of a cataclysmic nature that shadow Greek literature. So one is the war between the gods and the Titans, right? The war between the Olympian gods and the Titans, or you might say between the new gods and the old gods. So the Titans were the old gods, the Olympian gods were the new gods. The Olympians themselves were descended from Titans. And it comes up a number of times in Circe's that they're related. They're not like two different families. They're two different aspects of the same family. And so the background of all Greek mythology is this power struggle between old gods and new gods. And it's touched upon in almost everything you read. I mean, this is the same thing with Indian literature, between old gods and new gods. For some reason, this war between the old and the new is major thing in the background. And I don't fully understand what it means, why it was so gripping for everyone, but apparently it was. And maybe it's to do with power. Maybe generational power is an issue. But generational, not in the human sense, because these beings can't die, right? So power, violence, immense cruelty, kind of like eternal cruelty, that's in these stories, but it's always in the background. So this is the background of Circe. Now, one thing that struck me when reading the book is that not only do all the gods and the titans seem to be related in some ways, so they're all in the same family, and various characters say this, that we're all cousins, right? So it's a wonderful way for you to learn how the gods relate to each other. I hadn't realized so clearly that Prometheus was Circe's uncle, right? Nor had I realized that so clearly that Helios, the sun, was her father, and that Oceanus was her grandfather. The ocean was her grandfather. And then major characters in Greek literature that come up again and again. So we got Pasiphae is Circe's sister, and Pasiphae is the mother of Ariadne and Phaedra, right? And so then, and the Minotaur, right? And then also like Medea is her niece. So then when you make these connections through Circe, and I think the book is really good at making these connections, you realize how all of Greek mythology is a family drama, right? And then when you read Greek tragedies, you also realize each one of them also is a family drama, right? Isn't that interesting, right? That somehow the family is the heart of where everything happens. And I think that the more I reflect on it, the more I reflect on my own family as I grow older, is that the wisdom of this somehow is that everything really is in one family. If you look closely enough, that all the dark secrets, the bright secrets, they're all there in the family relationships, partly because of the density and the depth of the emotions that come up in that. You never get as angry at anyone as you do with someone in your family, and you also don't love them as intensely, but the two go together. So there's something here about family, and I'll just throw this out to you as a thought for you to think about later. Like, why is family so central in this? Why should it be so central in this? And this will become important later on. I'll come back to this question. So Greek myth as a family drama, Circe as a family drama, right? So as you're reading this, read it as a family drama and see what happens. This is about family. Whoa, right? But it can't be about family like in our families, because we die, right? So what does it mean for something to be a family drama when you can't die, right? Which means undying hostility. Right? When you hate each other forever, and you resent being chained to these people, right? So so this complex, and Circe really traces these complex generational entanglements. Now, when you're reading it, you also think that one of the results of the entanglements, this tremendously entangled world, is that you find yourself thinking, who is the result of what act? Who is the result of who mating with whom? Right? And how, knowing that thing, knowing how X relates to Y and Z, how do you relate to them? Right? So this is one thing that I think Madeline Miller sees really clearly. I did not see as clearly until the end of the book, that as you're reading the early chapters of the book, who relates to whom is really important. And she's trying to tell you this at the beginning of the book, so she tells you what the relationships are. And so you say, well, okay, you relate to your uncles and aunts differently than you relate to your cousins. You relate to, yeah, and you relate to your siblings in a certain way. And, you know, so when you make that real in your reading, that this is this family relation she's talking about, then it becomes a whole lot more interesting, right? That this is your mother's sister you're talking to, right? So she's really good at that, and so we are all resonates with me for this. I forget who said that. One of the characters, we are all cousins. But towards the end of the book, there's a point when Circe tells Telemachus, "You're not your blood." Right? And Telemachus re-echoes that to Circe, "We're not our blood." Right? And that's a significant moment, because that's when the first time these two characters say, "Well, we're not defined by our families. We're not our families." And I think no Greek would have said that. Now I'm generalizing about Greeks, you know, I postulate this, and you can see if I'm right or not. But I don't think a Greek would have said that. But I think this is the modern twist on it, right? So when Circe and Telemachus turn their backs on their families, that's not us. I think that's the modern individualistic freedom that may be not true to the world, not true to the ancient texts, but it's an interesting twist in the conversation, right? So one more thing I'd add about this godly realm that you find yourself in the first 200 pages is that it's not a realm of good versus evil, right? So it's not Manichaean in that way. It's not like Tolkien. All the gods seem to be equally amoral, right? Equally grudge-bearing, petty, desirous. It's hard to tell if they can love, right? And I don't know if love is possible without mortality, right? But somehow they don't love. They get obsessed. They get fixated. That's for sure. And they are very fixated with getting or keeping power, right? And they're very fixated with their fear of other people wanting power, right? So not other people, other gods wanting power, right? So there are certain traits the gods have. They can be of sublime, unearthly beauty, right? Or absolutely horrifying. They don't seem to occupy a kind of middle space of, you know, so when a god appears, it's not something you can be indifferent to, right? And similarly, they appear to speak differently, you know. So in terms of the range of emotional response, the gods appear to occupy extremes. Okay? So they, again, with love, again, they don't. You can ask yourself this as you're reading: is do the gods and the titans care about anything? Right? How do they care about anything? Right? In what way? How can they care if they can't die? Right? So I'll come back to this. Okay, so the other cataclysmic event that is in the background, I think mainly of the second half of the novel, and in again nearly all the Greek tragedies, is the Trojan War, right? So this is, we're not given a direct glimpse into this, but the Trojan War, in a way, it's like the parallel would be the Civil War for Americans. You know, whatever was the last, or the World War II for Europeans. And it's like, what was the last cataclysmic event that completely shapes the background of your whole thinking? And it appears to be the Trojan War. You keep coming back to this. So nearly all the great tragedies are spin-offs from the Trojan War. And this Trojan War, you know, it's a destroyer of a civilization in more ways than one. You know, so we see in the Iliad that Troy, a great civilization, a very refined civilization, was wiped out by the Achaeans, namely the other Greeks from the west. and the doesn't exist anymore, such that it took 3,000 years for somebody to be able to find where Troy was located. So when you're reading the Iliad, you're reading the story of how an entire civilization gets destroyed, right? And if you put yourself in this, like what would it feel like for a civilization that to be destroyed completely in a war? It's devastating. But the impact this had on the destroyers appears to be just as bad. And so the destroyers, otherwise known as the Achaeans, were a coalition of Greek city-states that united to in Homer to restore honor after the what they saw as the abduction of Helen from Greece, right, from Hellas. And so they, but also Troy was very wealthy, so you can surmise, that booty had something to do with it, right? So Odysseus was one of these Achaean princes who joined in the alliances, but he always seems to be the one who was reluctant, right? He's going because of a commitment, not because he himself was thirsty for glory. So in many of the incidents in the Iliad, Achilles is always the one who's thinking of the quickest way out, the quickest way to end the war, the quickest way to get home. He wasn't that interested in fighting, and he wasn't one of the ones who was a killing machine, right? So he's the smart one. He was also the one, I think, who thought of the Trojan horse, right? And so Odysseus is the hero of special forces. He was the first special forces operative because he thought that way, right? And so when one of the things that Madeline Miller alludes to is what happens in a Greek war. At the end of a Greek war, the victor will kill every male of the defeated side, kill all the children, and you get sometimes you get descriptions of babies getting their brains dashed out, in front of their mothers, and all the women were enslaved. And so and that was what happened, right? And one might say it's not as bad as in the Hebrew Bible, where God tells people, if you take a city, you have to destroy every two-legged and four-legged creature in there, right? Thorough annihilation. So it was pretty bad. And there's a moment in the Odyssey when Odysseus is hearing a bard retell the story of the fall of Troy. On Odysseus, his guest in Phaeacia at the time, he throws a cloth over his head and breaks down in tears. And the Homeric simile that accompanies that goes something like this: just as a woman whose city has been defeated, whose husband has been killed, and her children taken, are being dragged away by the opponent's soldiers, and the warriors are standing around her, poking her with their spears and jeering at her. Just so did Odysseus weep. Right, and it's it's shocking when you hear that. You don't expect the Greek hero to weep like that, but for Odysseus to be compared to that hero kind of makes it very, very alive. What the kind of feeling that he must have had. There's a line of thinking that's pretty modern with regard to the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I think the psychologist Jonathan Shea was the first one to come up with this in a book called Achilles in Vietnam, and that was followed by Odysseus in America, and those books are about PTSD, and Jonathan Shea reads Homer as somebody who knew more about PTSD, combat PTSD, than anyone else, and he reads those those books in terms, in the light of his own clients, said nobody knows more about this than anyone else. And so Madeline Miller, who credits Jonathan Shea in her bibliography, by the way, you should read this. You should read at least Achilles in Vietnam, because it's a riveting book. It's very moving, and it's not a difficult book to read. It's a difficult book to digest, but not to read. She picks up on this thread of PTSD, because if in the latter half of the novel, when Odysseus goes home, she attributes his destruction of all the suitors, all the male suitors of Penelope, and also practically all of the older males of Ithaca, as PTSD. The man is ruined. He can't live in civilian life anymore. He's bringing Troy back to Ithaca, right? And so Madeline Miller takes that very thread throughout, in a way that he's not the man that Penelope married. He can't be that man anymore. So Odysseus in Circe at the when he returns to Ithaca, he's done as a human being. He's not capable of happiness anymore. He can't really live a normal life anymore, right? So she picks up on that as in a way the result of the Trojan War, the trauma of the Trojan War, which is in the original plays. Yeah, I could talk a lot more about that, but I won't. So I'll go to the Odyssey now. So in the Odyssey, so Circe, the heart of Circe is based on Book 10 of the Odyssey, when Odysseus arrives on Circe's island. Right now, Odysseus started off from Troy with 12 ships. By the time he reaches Circe's island, he's lost all but one. Right? So he's in a way a terrible leader, right? But a great leader to have if you're in a pickle, because he usually thinks of a way out of the pickle. Right? So one of my colleagues has the opening question for the Odyssey. Would you follow Odysseus into the Cyclops cave? No. If you had to be in the Cyclops cave, who would you choose as leader? Oh, Odysseus. So it's the kind of person he is. But Book 10 of the Odyssey shows Odysseus landing on Circe's island with one ship left, and they have just been traveling around raiding, and these guys are pirates, right? They raid. These are not nice guys by any means. So they raid and they pillage, but they've just been chased off by the Lastrygonians, who are gigantic and savage, and kill the Lastrygonians kill a lot of them. So they arrive on Circe's island practically broken, and I think Odysseus has wind that this is Circe's island, and he sees in the distance smoke that must be from Circe's cottage, and he tells his men, let's check this out. And their first reaction is to break down weeping. Right? This is very emotional. We've had enough. We don't do this. Don't do this. Had enough. And it's so sad. Then, after some discussion, he delegates a bunch of them to go to Circe's, to go to Circe, and she, seeing these hard men coming up at her, and in the Odyssey they don't do anything to her, whereas in the novel she has reason to be wary, So she immediately turns them into pigs. And one of them escapes and goes down and tells the story to Odysseus, and this causes more weeping. And Odysseus says, I'm going to go myself. So he goes, and it's very I'll read this to you. This very moving passage where Odysseus goes and investigates, and after a while, let's see. So she had turned them into pigs, and then Homer says, but the minds within them stayed as they had been. So they kept their human minds while they turned into pigs. Odysseus goes and he convinces Circe to turn them back into humans. When they're turned back into humans, it's a very beautiful moment, and Homer is full of these extraordinary, beautiful moments. And they turned back once more into men, younger than they had been, and taller for the eye to behold, and handsomer by far. They recognized me, and each of them clung to my hand. The lovely longing for lamentation came over us, and the house echoed terribly to the sound, and even the goddess took pity. It's beautiful. But for this one moment, it seems they've been turned back to as new, right? To before all this had happened. And part of those few lines contain all that loss, like what all the damage that's happened in those years, the 19 years. Yeah. And here they are. So for once you glimpsed, it could have been these young men. Now they're these broken men, right? And so Homer is like full of these details. Now, so we see in Madeline Miller's book, her addition to the contribution, this portrait of Odysseus as a man already broken, and she develops that, and why he can't be in Ithaca. Now, the Odyssey is also another story. The first 4 books of the Odyssey are about Odysseus' son, Telemachus, seeking his father. So in a way, we don't get Odysseus until book 5, right? But we get Telemachus, the young son whose father left when he was very small, right? So this is a story about Telemachus, who then Madeline Miller picks up in her book, in the last 100 pages. Now, so her novel then becomes, it's not just a conversation with the Odyssey, but this wonderful thing it becomes is that it's a completing of the Odyssey, right? So what happened to Telemachus? What happened to Penelope? Right? Did Odysseus and Circe have any kids? Okay, so answer is yes. So so there's a lost ancient epic, right? It's the Telegony by Eugamon of Cyrene, who was about 7th century BC, and it's lost, and it's described. The plot was described by later authors, and you can look all of this up in the great ancient Greek commentator Wikipedia, right? So it's all there. So you look up Telegonus, this will all come up. But in that poem, it's another epic poem, the Telegony. What happens is so Circe and Odysseus have multiple children, and Madeline Miller mentions only one, right? And that's Telegonus, and Telegonus is the boy they had together, and here are wonderful chapters in Circe, where Circe, the goddess, is experiencing pregnancy and the early years of motherhood. How do I clean this thing? Why is it crying all the time? Why won't it listen to me? And this knowing that Athena is trying to kill this baby, so she's saying I can't, she has to keep this baby from running off, so you have this spirited 2-year-old boy, and he has to be kept close to her the whole time. Can you imagine how maddening this would be to a goddess who's used to freedom and power, right? So that's Telegonus, so this, and in a way, that whole sequence is Circe's reckoning with one aspect of what it is to be human is to have like the problem of generation, right? To be in charge of a little being that you feel is your own. It's a wonderful sequence. But anyway, in the telegony, that the ancient lost epic poem, at the end, the very ending, Odysseus is killed by Telegonus with a spear made of a stingray. So he's killed by poison. And in the telegony, Telegonus marries Penelope, right? And Madeline Miller doesn't make a huge deal of that, because I don't think she quite believes in that. But what Circe does is that what happens in the book of Circe is that Circe marries Telemachus. Whoa, right? So this is major spoiler, but I think once you can keep an eye on their relationship developing as you're reading this, and ask yourself if this is convincing or not, right? But so Madeline Miller kind of gets that from not from that book, because she kind of read it because it was lost, but she'd read about it, and seemed to be an interesting completing of the story of the Odyssey, and also the story of Circe, right? So so thinking about this, I didn't quite like this ending, or at least I was uneasy with it, because for various reasons. I mean, one is that it's semi-incestuous, right? So marrying the son of your lover by another woman. Right. So this so there's that semi-incestuous element to it, and you wonder, maybe Greek gods didn't feel the same inhibition to incest as we do, so that would make sense. Circe doesn't have that inhibition. But then I'm thinking, well, what could possibly attract such a strong, wise woman to this callow young man? And also, I mean, I can understand why Telemachus might be attracted to her, but so there's that question. Quite reasonably, I really don't understand why Telegonus and Penelope would have got married. And maybe it's wise that she didn't develop that. It's a good choice. Penelope must have been about, I don't know, 55 at the time. Telegonus was about 18, right? That doesn't make much sense, right? And so, yeah. So then. The other aspect of the Odyssey that really comes up very strongly in the final pages of Circe is Circe's choice to become human, right? Throughout most of the novel, Circe's asking the question of, what am I? Who am I? And it takes her thousands of years to find out, that she's always like pushed to the periphery of the godly realm. And there's something about living in Ithaca and being with Odysseus that makes her realize that maybe she's not of them. Maybe she belongs more to the world of mortals. So this huge decision that she makes at the end to become mortal, it's I hope you guys talk about that in the discussion when it comes up. Well, why would she choose to become mortal, especially now that she knows something about what it is to be mortal, that she chooses to be mortal? So this is not out of ignorance. And this parallels exactly a moment in the Odyssey when Odysseus, this is before returning to Ithaca and after Circe, finds himself on the island of the nymph Calypso. And he's there for a couple of years, so a couple of years of nurturing, tender care, great sex with a beautiful goddess, and he's offered immortality to stay with her. And he refuses immortality in order to go back and be with Penelope, right? That's amazing, right? So why would he choose mortality, especially after everything he's gone through? So I think I'm going to leave you with that question. Why did he choose mortality? And maybe I'll, in the time that we have left, which is about 10 minutes, let me open it up for questions. Thoughts? Yes, sir.
There seems to be a trend in recent years of women. We're reading your microphone. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. There seems to be a trend in recent years of women looking back at Latin and Greek authors and reinterpreting them. I'm reading a version of Metamorphoses now by Stephanie McCarter, and I know Madeline Miller's book is a novel, but I just wonder to what extent you think that reinterpretations have to have some loyalty to the original. I'm not talking specifically about Circe, because that's, she can write whatever she wants, but Nina McLaughlin did a book like this too. So just from your perspective as a scholar, I'm wondering if you have a feel for that.
Yeah, I'm not a purist by any means, and I know that the Greek and Latin authors themselves were constantly reworking the older tales. Think about Virgil and the Aeneid and what the Aeneid does to the Odyssey, right? It's a very drastic and radical reworking. Virgil, for example, hated war. So as a poet who hated war, and he was, a farmer type aristocrat, he hated war, and he reworked the Homeric epics to a work that is actually very, very skeptical about heroism and about war as a way to found cities. So there have been these constant reworkings from period to period of ancient myths. So Chaucer did the same with the story of Troilus. Shakespeare did the same with the story of Troilus. So I think in every age there are authors who read this old stuff and they see something in it that speaks to them, right? And I think the impetus is this speaks to me, and I don't think anybody has expressed how it speaks to me, right? And I think that's the impetus of bringing this out in another version. But when you ask that, you think that certainly when you're reading or when you're watching new adaptations or new versions of old favorites, there are some that fail, right? Plainly, there are some that fail, right? There are some Batman movies that are not Batman. There's some Dracula movies that fall flat, right? And so here you have to ask yourself, well, it's an interesting question. Like what do I accept as a good, interesting reworking, and one that fails, right? To my mind, the reason Hugh Gammon's version of the Odyssey fails is because I don't think the ending, for example, of Telegonus marrying Penelope, I don't think it makes emotional or psychological sense to me, right? He might have made it make sense in his poem, right? He might have been very bold about this, but just hearing the retelling, I say, okay, I'm glad I don't have to read that, right? Or with King Lear, there are these 18th century reworkings of King Lear, one by Nahum Tate, who wrote the libretto for the Messiah. And Nahum Tate rewrote King Lear such that Cordelia lives in the end, and Cordelia marries Edgar, right? Because and it comes from a good-hearted response that the ending of the original is too painful for anyone to bear, right? And everyone wants his happy ending. But I say, okay, I understand the reason, but I don't think this works, right? So in a way, it's good that people try things. I like it that people try things and they experiment, and so then it throws back like, if we don't think it works, why? That's interesting. There's something about that is not true either to the story or to the human heart, and I think we have to ask those questions. Thank you.
First of all, thank you. Very practical. I will go back and reread the whole thing again. But the point you made about the Greek myths and the Greek plays and the literature all about being family stories makes me think of actually the I Ching, where the whole world is actually described by the structure of the family. First daughter, first son, second daughter, second son. So the fact that families do encompass all human emotions, relationships, potentialities is very it's very provoking, but I think it's also very true.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I've noticed in my own family, things like if two people in my family want to be engineers, I have to be an artist, right? Or if there's if your father is pushing too hard in one subject, you have to take the opposite point of view, and it's and so there's some tendency in families to seek completion, right? That you feel if it becomes too partial, then you rebel, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sure. I don't know if this is a valid literary comparison. I'm not saying that it is, but for me, as I read the book, it's such a deep tragedy, and I just felt so moved to the point where sometimes I just had to put it down. It was just too painful. And throughout the book, Circe is experiencing this mortal aspect. I mean, she's kind of been pushed aside by the gods, and she's on the fringe, and she's on her island, and once she has her son, it's like everything that's all consuming for her, and yet she knows that he's in mortal danger because of Athena. And everything she tries and everything, she knows it's going to be futile at some point because of the fates. Yeah. They will dictate that. For me, I would keep thinking about the message of the Buddha, about everything you love, ultimately you will lose, even your life, even yourself. And so the point of living was about how do you come to some acceptance of that reality. And I keep thinking of Circe in that way, she's experiencing tremendous pain, and yet she has to come to terms with it, of acceptance. And that's maybe towards the termination of the book when she becomes mortal.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. I mean, one of the things that's very moving is that she feels things, right? She's a feeling, and she doesn't want to live forever. To live forever with a capacity to feel so intensely, that's hell, right? Yeah. Whereas the other gods can erase their memories. I mean, they don't care as much because they're already living with a prospect of living forever. But Circe, she takes things to heart. Yeah. What moved you most in the book?
I think when she lets her son leave.
Yeah, that was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. It seems like the reflection you just shared about Circe not wanting to live forever and feel pain kind of relates back to the question about why Odysseus decided not to become immortal. You talked about his PTSD and his suffering after the war. I mean, maybe there's a kind of similarity there.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah. There's that added to perhaps wanting to grow old with someone, right? And maybe that is a distinctive feature. Like one of the benefits of human life is you get to grow old with someone if you're lucky, right? You get to grow old with someone you love if you're lucky. And there's something in that, you get to grow old and die, and something beautiful in that. I think Odysseus of all, he's a very, very complex character. At the beginning of the Odyssey, he's referred to as the man of many turns. Right? He's in many sides to Odysseus, and I think that's why the women tend to get attracted to him, because in the Odyssey, the smartest people, the deepest, the strongest people are all women, and Odysseus is the only man who can keep up with them. Really, which is what has caused certain scholars like Samuel Butler to think that maybe the Odyssey was written by a woman, right? But the thing about Odysseus is that wherever he goes, he always notices how something is made. He appreciates building. He appreciates fabrics. He always notices those things. And one of his trademark signs is his hands. People always notice his hands, the beautiful hands, but they're hands that make things. Among Odysseus' other traits is that the Odyssey has about 10 baths in it. People run baths for Odysseus, and he'll come and he'll look at this bath, this hot bath, after a journey with delight. Right. So this man he's human. He's recognizable. You know, after a long day at airports and things, you go to your hotel. You want the clean sheets and the nice shower. You know, you feel human again. And so with Odysseus, you know, Odysseus is somebody who can feel human again. Right. This is one of his traits. When he goes after a long day of struggle, he gets a bath, and the bed is made for him in the porch, and he's given some nice fabric to sleep on, a blanket, Odysseus appreciates those things, and I wonder if that kind of groundedness in the beauties, the little beauties of mortal life, right, is what also keeps him grounded in mortality. He would rather not be ethereal, you know, of all people. Yeah, which is why he's not somebody who would live for reputation. Glory and honor don't interest him that much. One more question.
At the beginning, you called this a literary fantasy, and then we discussed quite a bit. You discussed the fantasy idea. I'd like to ask about the literary aspect of it, and if especially, I have not read the classics in their original. I thought the writing was beautiful, visual. Was she patterning the writing style off the originals, or is this unique and more modern? And how would you characterize the literary aspect of the book?
I think for me, what I meant was literary is that she's bouncing off works of literature, right? And that she picks up something of the style, a kind of more elevated style when the gods talk to each other, and I think she gives a very good psychological reading of some of the characters that we know and love, like Odysseus, like Telemachus. So in that respect, so what I meant was it's a fantasy that sets itself in relationship to works of literature, and it's not that interested in like what Greeks really did. Right? That's all I meant. The writing is beautiful. Her writing is beautiful, but also very modern. Right? She's conscious of doing a modern take on these. It's incisive. It's crisp writing. Sometimes very lyrical. Her turns of phrasing are amazing. Sometimes I had to put the book down briefly because of that. It was some description that took me. Anyway, if you haven't read it, read it, and then you'll enjoy it. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for coming out today to listen to this talk. I know I have a lot more to think about. I now want to go back and reread the book. So anyway, but yeah, please be sure and pick up a program of all the other things that are happening. We are having a book discussion next Saturday, May 4th, at the main library, and there's going to be one here after that and one at Lafarge, I believe. So yeah, so be sure to come to discuss more about Circe. And yeah, thanks again to Krishnan Venkatesh for coming out today.